Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia. I'm 47 years old, and this is one of the most unbelievable stories I've ever experienced. Even now, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but I can't stop replaying the events in my mind.
I don't need to take your advice. I have credentials. If you're unwilling to engage with fresh ideas just because you disapprove of the source, then frankly, you're a fool. I had a higher mathematics professor who struggled to figure out how to get a cup of coffee from a vending machine. Bless his heart. My ex-boyfriend's mother, a linguistics professor fluent in more than 10 languages, was also one of the least practical people I've encountered. Some examples. She genuinely believed that in emergencies, flight attendants are ejected from planes via catapult. She was also convinced that donating blood causes diseases and could lead to death. But my favorite instance was her claim that her son's orthopedic issues weren't due to a major injury he'd sustained. Instead, she thought his knee pain resulted from eating too much ketchup. This doesn't quite involve a PhD, but I attended a party in the UK filled with medical students, all of whom were predictably drunk. A guy fell and broke his collarbone, immediately attracting a crowd of med students bombarding him with repetitive questions and working through their clinical checklists. Half an hour later, I went to check on him and asked why the ambulance hadn't arrived yet. No one had an answer, because not a single person had called one. Despite being in a room full of future doctors, no one had thought to contact emergency services or arrange transportation for someone in serious pain with a broken clavicle. Peter Duesberg, a molecular biologist and UC Berkeley researcher with an impressive career, became infamous for denying the link between HIV and AIDS. His claims led many, including HIV-positive individuals, down a dangerous path. These people avoided antiretroviral treatment and sometimes infected others. One prominent AIDS denialist, Christine Maggiore, even transmitted HIV to her infant through breastfeeding, believing HIV was harmless and unrelated to AIDS. My wife's stepfather, a chemist with diabetes, once went to the ER due to dangerously high blood sugar. He insisted his eating habits had been good, even though they usually weren't, and couldn't understand why his levels were elevated. Meanwhile, in his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed with grape juice. He explained that their sugars canceled each other out and dismissed our concerns, claiming his chemistry knowledge proved he was right. A physics professor fell victim to a catfishing scheme orchestrated by someone pretending to be a supermodel. The imposter convinced him to transport her suitcase from Brussels to Milan, which turned out to be filled with drugs. Anyone with basic sense would have recognized the scam immediately, but this highly intelligent individual convinced himself it was legitimate. As a hospital security worker, I've observed that around 90% of the doctors are highly intelligent, but often lack basic common sense, leaving me puzzled about how they manage their daily lives. Edit. I forgot to mention that I've been in a relationship for nearly 2 years with a pediatric cardiologist, and it's just as surprising at home as it is with the doctors I encounter at work. On the bright side, it's never boring. I hold a PhD, yet I consider myself clueless in many aspects of life. Earning a PhD simply requires being either skilled or determined enough to conduct research in a very specific field. Edit. Several commenters pointed out that my explanation was too simplistic. In addition to research skills, earning a PhD demands hard work, a bit of luck, and basic competence in the subject matter. However, none of that guarantees you'll be competent in other areas of life. My wife, who holds 2 master's degrees and a PhD and is recognized internationally for her expertise, is also incredibly absent-minded. My role is to make sure her car is functional, she remembers to take her medication, and she eats something besides eggs and yogurt. She can be incredibly brilliant one moment and then almost walk into a moving bus the next. I adore her, but she's undeniably a scatterbrain. My college roommate, the smartest person I've ever known, once spent nearly an hour trying to wedge a desk into the corner of our dorm room at an awkward angle. She wouldn't listen to me, insisting, "I've got this." After she finally gave up, I stepped in, pulled the desk away from the wall, aligned it correctly, and slid it back into place in one smooth motion. That experience, and many others, taught me that while she might have been the intellectual in the room, I was the one with better practical judgment. The United States' entire pandemic response is a prime example. Practically everyone became an amateur virologist, while the real virologists were dismissed as sellouts and liars. Dr. Oz is a perfect illustration of this dynamic. He graduated from Harvard, is a bona fide university professor, and made groundbreaking contributions to cardiac surgery. Yet, he endorsed hydroxychloroquine as a COVID-19 treatment based solely on internet research. I won't even delve into the obvious scams he peddles on his TV show, as I suspect he doesn't truly believe in them. It seems more like an act to exploit gullible viewers. I have a PhD and work with other PhD holders, and a common trait among them is believing that success in one field automatically makes them experts in every other area. They often hold strong opinions on anything and everything. This behavior, sometimes referred to as PhD syndrome, is all too familiar. On a related note, consider how nepotism plays a significant role in gaining admission to Ivy League schools before being overly impressed by someone's degree from one. I visited 3 emergency rooms when I felt something was wrong with my arm. On the first day, it felt like a bug bite, but by the 4th day, it felt like a stretched bungee cord running from my elbow to my wrist. 3 different doctors told me it was a skin irritation or dermatitis, but I kept insisting it was something more serious. Without any medical background, I work in property management. I walked into a 4th ER on day 5 and said, "I'll pay out of pocket or stay all night, but something is wrong with my arm." After enduring rude looks and comments, I was finally given an arm ultrasound, followed by an MRI, and promptly admitted. They found a 3-inch blood clot in my upper arm, 2 in my chest, and 1 that had already reached my lung. 22 days later, I was diagnosed with factor II gene mutation, a blood clotting disorder. I'm an attorney and was taking a graduate course at a local university when the professor, unaware of my profession, claimed that holding a PhD exempts you from jury duty because, legally, you're considered too intelligent for it. I corrected her, stating this wasn't true and that, in my state, the only requirements for serving as a juror are being a U.S. citizen. She became furious, her face red with veins bulging, and vowed to prove me wrong in the next class. She never followed up. During a college keg party, the gravity keg wasn't dispensing beer properly. I checked and saw it was nearly full, but noticed the air intake valve was closed. I opened it, poured myself a beer, and the issue was resolved. Minutes later, someone else complained that the keg was empty. I told them it wasn't empty and had been a tap issue I already fixed. They insisted it wasn't working, so I returned to find the intake valve closed again. After reopening it, I poured the person a beer. As she left, my roommate came in and closed the valve. This roommate, a straight A student with a photographic memory, thought he knew better. I explained the valve needed to stay open to let air replace the beer being poured. He argued, saying the carbonation in the beer eliminated the need for air displacement. I asked 2 questions. Why was the upper valve even there? And did he really think the carbonation produced as much gas as the beer being dispensed? He paused briefly before replying, "I have a 4.0. What's your GPA?" Then he walked off. People often say the world is run by fools. If that's true, I can't help but wonder why I'm not in a higher position. Dr. Ben Carson, one of the most accomplished neurosurgeons in the world, believes the Egyptian pyramids were built to store grain. I worked with a woman who graduated from Brown and never missed an opportunity to talk about it. She constantly mentioned Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school, and it was obvious she looked down on anyone who didn't attend an Ivy League institution. One day, after she was boasting yet again, I couldn't help but say, "Oh, you went to Brown." And yet, here we are working the same job side by side. I know someone with a master's degree in finance who thinks everyone should simply own a house. When I asked how they could afford it, he replied, "They just need to work hard." I couldn't stop laughing. I used to work IT at a hospital and once helped a doctor who forgot his password. While spelling his name over the phone using phonetics, he said, "Z as in xylophone." My eyebrows shot up. While working at a university, I noticed many academics who were experts in their fields lacked basic practical sense. My favorite instance was a group of geology professors and PhD students who got stuck at an entryway for several minutes because they didn't realize the door required pulling instead of pushing. What made it worse was they had used the same door earlier that day. All of Trump's lawyers passed the bar exam, which is a requirement to practice law. Yet, time and again, they demonstrate either a complete lack of understanding of the law or a blatant disregard for it. A doctor once told me my 6-month-old couldn't have strep throat because she was an infant. As her condition worsened and urgent care clinics were closed, I took her to the ER, where she was diagnosed with strep throat. My first IT support call at my first job was from a doctor in a medical lab whose computer wouldn't power on. I guided her through troubleshooting steps like confirming it was plugged in and whether the monitor was on, but nothing worked. I went to her office and found the computer plugged into a power strip, which was then plugged into itself. Apparently, the cleaning crew had unplugged everything during a deep clean, and she reconnected the strip incorrectly, thinking it would work as long as it was plugged in.